Apparently, there's a running joke among some scripture scholars that Jesus is always eating. Like he's either having a meal or coming from a meal or going to a meal. And regardless of whether or not you think that's a particularly hilarious joke, it says something about the importance of that image. This image of Jesus eating with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes. Now, as a preliminary point, it's important to recognize that when the gospel talks about sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes, it's not trying to pick on those three categories of persons, because those three categories of persons collectively, they represent each one of us. Because if you think about it, like sinners, tax collectors, and prostitutes, what do they have in common? These are people who are addicted to sin, who are thoroughly addicted to various patterns and habits of sin. And in a certain sense, like that's all of us, right? We all struggle with the reality of original sin. We all struggle with concupiscence and desire. We're all, in a certain sense, thoroughly addicted to sin. So again, whenever you hear this idea of Jesus eating with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes, don't focus on those three categories of persons. The whole idea is that he's eating with people who are very much like us. But you see, on top of that, the fact that Jesus is always eating with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes, it speaks to the fact that the whole process of conversion, this whole struggle that we're all engaged in to become the persons that God is calling us to be, where we're laboring to become truly sons and daughters of Christ the King in the most authentic sense of that phrase, is not meant to be the short-term thing. It's not meant to be this kind of straightforward linear process, but it necessarily is a long-term thing. Peaks and valleys, ups and downs. And you see, the whole point in a certain sense is that it's okay. It really is okay. God is the God of reality. So whatever is real, whatever is true, even though it might be painful, even though it might be embarrassing, you don't need to back away from it because, again, God is the God of reality. And so wherever is real has already been redeemed in a certain sense. And so therefore I can have the courage and the wherewithal to actually face it with the Lord. And more to the point, it speaks to the fact that God truly is the one who accepts us as we are, even as he calls us to be something more. You know, the example that comes to mind, I remember back in the day attending a vocations conference in Dallas, back when I was on this vocations committee set up by the Archdiocese of Toronto. And I remember attending that conference and being surprised in a certain sense that it was attended not just by vocations directors, but people also involved in seminary formation. So the whole idea is that they weren't just trying to figure out how to get guys into the seminary. They were also talking and discussing amongst themselves, what do we do to help these people, help these young men become happy, healthy, and holy priests? And one talk in particular really stood out for me where the speaker was talking about the fact that we need to acknowledge that the people entering seminary, these young men, are coming from broken backgrounds because they come from us. They come from our society. Broken families, broken backgrounds, different things they've been struggling with before they entered the seminary. And so in order to help them become the persons and the priests that we want them to be, we need to be attentive to that. Deficiencies in their backgrounds, ways in which we're called to help them become the men that Christ wants them to be. And the part of this one talk that really struck me is when the speaker said that in order to remedy the situation, in order to help these young men overcome their circumstances and again become the persons that God is calling them to be, we need to give them time and attention. Mindful of the fact that in the words of some spiritual writer, love equals time plus attention. And so again, the remedy was love. The remedy is love. But rather than think of love in terms of like this vague abstract thing, to think of it concretely in terms of love equals time plus attention. And funny enough, the example he drew upon was this image of Jesus eating with sinners and tax collectors. So his whole point was that even though it's true that sometimes Christ would teach his disciples by way of a lecture format, so you think about them being sat down to be taught the nuances of the Our Father. For the most part, Jesus didn't do that. Like he didn't do that in terms of helping his disciples become the person that God was calling them to be. Instead, he simply journeyed with them. He hung out with them. He spent time with them. He gave them copious amounts of his time and attention. And the whole idea is that none of that was wasted time. None of that was wasted time because this whole time they'll be watching him, the disciples would be, watching him, learning from his example, just changing in positive ways simply by being in his presence. And on top of that, they'd be convicted of his love for them. And as a result, he could give them the challenging truth. He can give them the challenging word, and they would receive it from him, whereby they might receive it from someone else. because, again, he had proven his love for them by giving them so much of his time and attention. And the speaker went on, of course, to say that so it should be with each one of us, especially if we're in positions of authority and responsibility in terms of helping people, again, become the persons that God is calling them to be. We need to give people time, we need to give people attention, and specifically we need to learn to journey with people in the midst of their strengths and their weaknesses, their failures, their successes, every aspect, every shade of life, such that people might develop confidence in our love and also experience multiple times this beautiful moment where I can be weak and vulnerable before my friend, and he or she does not reject me. And the whole point is that that is healing. That is redemptive. You know, the example that comes to mind, my own father actually died of cancer many years ago in the mid-90s, I believe. And before he died, though, there was a priest who came to visit my family in the hospital. So it was my mom, my brother, and myself, Monsignor Gregory Smith. And I remember him having multiple conversations with my mother. And to this day, I don't remember a single thing that he said. Sorry, Monsignor Smith, if you're listening to this. But it's true. I don't remember a single thing that he said. But at the same time, I knew, and I know now, that he loved my mom, he loved my brother, and he loved me. And he loved my father, certainly. You know, he anointed them, baptized them, all these different things, right? But I was convicted of his love. And why? Not because he said kind of especially wise or clever things that I knew of, right? But because he gave us his time and he gave us his attention. And because he did that, I knew that he loved us. And to be honest, it's a memory that I carry with me even now as a priest in terms of my own pastoral practice. And so a lot of times you're in situations, and sometimes you can put sort of undue pressure on yourself to be clever, to be wise, to say like the right thing in the circumstance. But to always go back to this thing, what does God require of me? He requires me to give of my love to these people in the circumstance. And what is love? Not a feeling, not some vague kind of, weird sort of thing, right? But love specifically is time plus attention. Am I giving these people my time? Am I giving these people my attention? If so, I am loving them regardless of what I might feel, regardless of what things I might say or not say. But, to go back to our original point, the whole idea is that God the Father obviously embodies everything we've been talking about today. God is the one who gives us his time and attention. He is more than willing to journey with us through the ups and downs, the successes and the failures, the peaks and the valleys. That's who God is, right? And the whole point is that you need to be confident in that. And it comes through in a very beautiful and powerful way in this thing called the parable of the two sons, which you find in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 21. So as a quick recap, it's a really short story. There's this father who has two sons. And so he asks them one at a time to help him to labor in the vineyard. And as you might recall, one says yes, but eventually doesn't go. The other person says no, but then eventually comes. And then the story kind of abruptly ends, which begs the question, what's the point? Well, to break it down, the Father obviously represents God. The vineyard represents the world. And the work, perhaps you might say, is the work of salvation. But then here's the thing. How does God bring about the work of salvation? Not so much through programs or courses or whatnot, but through his suffering and death, on the cross. And so given all that, when the father goes to the two sons and says, "Sons, will you work with me in the vineyard?" What he's saying is, will you labor with me, sons, for the salvation of the world, knowing that it will involve your suffering and death. But we'll do this together. Suffer with me, die with me, for the salvation of the world. And you see, once you understand that, then it contextualizes the responses of the two sons, respectively. So the one who says yes, apparently when you look at the original Greek, it's a quick yes. It's like a really quick yes, almost like a superficial yes. So the whole idea is that he didn't really think it through, and so he says yes because he thinks, okay, that's what my father wants me to say. And once you realize that, is it any wonder that that son quickly falls away? Because his yes was shallow, it had no roots, and so, yeah, to be expected, he falls away when it comes in the moment of actual trial. Now, in contrast, you look at the son who says no. So I know a lot of people look at that story and they say, well, the reason why he said no is because he was disrespectful, he didn't care about his father. I don't think so. I think the reason why he says no to his father is because he gets it. He understands what the father is asking. I understand, Father, that you're asking me to suffer and die. I know it's for the salvation of the world. I know it's with you, but because I'm a human being with these natural apprehensions, it's not my first choice to suffer and die for anything, even if for the salvation of the world, even if it's with you. But what's interesting is that if you look at the original Greek, what it says is that that son aftercared. Like he made his decision, his initial decision to say no to the Father, but then afterwards he aftercared. He reflected upon his decision, and he realized that even though I have this preliminary desire to not suffer and die, my deeper desire, my deepest desire, is to be truly with my Father in heaven. So I will go back to my Father to suffer with him, to labor with him in the vineyard for the salvation of the world. And so you pull it all together, and not just the stuff we've been saying in the context of this particular parable, but everything we've been saying in the context of today. It says something about the reality of God. Who is God? God is the one who gets it. He understands, and he has patience, and he's willing to give us his time and attention to journey with us as we struggle to become the persons he's calling us to be. In other words, he is willing to put up with all these preliminary no's because he knows these necessarily precede, eventually, hopefully, the firm, unflinching yes that we will give him in life. And this takes all sorts of forms, right? The no of fear, the no of habit, certainly the no of sin. But the whole idea, again, is that the Lord accepts us as we are, even as he calls us to be something more. And the thing I want to impress upon you is that that is exceedingly good news. Certainly we're called to try our best. Certainly we're called to bring goodwill to the table, to struggle, to labor, to get up after we fall, to try our best to build virtue, to put down sin, to journey with our Father in heaven, working in the vineyard. At the same time, again, we have a Father who gets it. Jesus Christ is the God of reality. Don't be afraid of what is. Don't be afraid of your frail self. Don't be afraid of your sinful self. The Lord is willing to journey with you to the very end. Again, he accepts you as you are, even as he calls you to be something more. And may God bless you all.